I am happy to introduce to you Dawn Sturdevant Baum, for whom this event honors, but not just in words, it's our actions we're going to take from this room and go out, and the connecting that is happening here. I will read her words. Her whole background, her 2 law degrees, and all of that are written on a sheet of paper right back in that corner. I want you to hear her words. We cannot achieve healthy living without including Native nations and their wise traditional ways. And she spoke at 2 of the UN climate change COP events, one in Scotland and one in Egypt, virtually in November of a year ago, is the one in Egypt. It's really wonderful for us to bring our territory and what used to be our territory back into our control, to be able to use our traditional knowledge to prevent the massive wildfires by techniques like burning designated underbrush, keeping the forest healthy. Clean, free-flowing river will once again support one of America's greatest fisheries available for indigenous people and for their traditional ways. We've done that for millennia, and the rest of the world is finally catching on to what we were doing. I'm one of those who caught on. I worked as a volunteer in the Ridgeway Pine Belt State Natural Area, and we were taught by the DNR to gather the brush, especially the invasives, and it took a number of years of waiting, but the DNR finally had enough staff to do a light burn of 1/3 of the 500 acres in the state natural area. And it was so important for those trees, which are unique trees. These are a relic is that these are direct descendants from the pine that were among the first trees to grow in Wisconsin and Illinois. I thought I was being taught by a modern ecologist, but they were teaching me what the Native people had done for generations, for decades. And that's why there weren't these terrible wildfires in their era. And now we're learning their ways. She died this June. Just a month or 2 earlier than that, the first of 4 dams were being removed from the river that had always supported them. The Yurok Tribe needed their whole economy, their whole spiritual exercises, their way of life was dependent on the salmon being able to grow and function. And they were dying because when dams slow down water, the water gets too warm, the salmon won't survive. And they haven't been able to have their own salmon for their own religious services for several years. But now in the near future they will again. It'll take a while, but within 2 days of the first dam being taken out, they saw salmon coming back, which astounded them. They didn't know how long it would take. But I want to close my remarks about Dawn by telling you that the tribe and the people she worked with, about 700 employees and about 6,000 people, got to know her starting 7 years ago. And when she died this summer, she had moved to Green Bay, but they insisted that she continue to be their head lawyer. And she was till the day she died. And they invited our family to the memorial they were doing. And this book, and there are more of these available, have the words that they wrote about her. And I'm just going to read the last part because I want you to know it wasn't just what she did to save the environment. It was who she was and how she worked with people. But Dawn's legacy was not defined by her professional achievements. It was equally characterized by her profound personal qualities. She cultivated and nurtured an extensive network of professional relationships that extended far beyond her immediate circles, enriching the Native American community as a whole. Above all, her kindness, patience, and willingness to mentor others served as a beacon of light for those seeking guidance. Dawn's remarkable ability to navigate negotiations with a calm and composed demeanor showcased her exceptional negotiation skills, leaving an indelible mark on those who had the privilege of working alongside her. As we remember Dawn Baum, let us not only celebrate her achievements, but also the enduring qualities of her leadership, compassion, and determination that she exemplified. I'm sorry, I'm a mother yet here. Dawn's legacy serves as a reminder that a single individual's dedication can shape destinies and touch lives in ways that resonate through generations. And what we're doing today, we're helping that resonation through generations, in Wisconsin in particular. And now we're ready to introduce our first speaker. Dean, I met you mostly through what you have written and how you gathered people together. This is a man from Door County, loves water, and saw, and he'll explain, the many ways in which our water is being hurt. And most nonprofits don't get their act together enough to be able to hire an attorney to block the efforts by the big business lawyers. I'm a lawyer myself, but never would call myself a big business lawyer, who go after and try to make our laws not be effective. But it's not just the money to hire the lawyer and an exceptional lawyer, but also the getting so many people to show up at the state capitol, in hearings, signing petitions, sending letters, calling, all the things, and also their local government. He'll explain that to you. To me, as a person who grew up on a farm, and I've been through 3 farm crises, dairy farm crises, and to not only know somebody cares, but they know how to change, how to prevent the worsening of our legislation and so forth.
Again, I'm Dean Hoegger, and I'm with Clean Water Action Council, and my expertise is education. I spent 30 years in an elementary classroom, and I earned a master's degree in curriculum instruction with an emphasis in environmental education. So that's my environmental background. But then I also have a legal background. I earned a degree at NWTC, a paralegal degree, so that's been very helpful in my position as Director of Clean Water Action Council. Clean Water Action Council was begun in 1985, so we've been around for quite a while. The focus was the cleanup of the Fox River. A lot of people came when Greenpeace, their ship came, the Free. It organized a lot of people to get involved, and that's when our organization began. So basically our mission statement is doing what we're doing today, education, and also we're an action group, Clean Water Action Council. We do a lot of actions, including legal actions, and I'll be talking a lot about legal actions today. So our focus here today is protecting our waters, and we're going to talk about how we can do that, a big picture. We're getting directions from the crowd here. So a big focus will be what laws do we have that allow us to focus on. So as I was saying, we're going to focus on the big picture, but then we're going to zoom in on using local laws and how we can use local laws to protect our waters. So first of all, we have to remember that environmental laws do not protect themselves. We have to take action to make sure that they are in fact enforced. And again, we're focusing today on water. You know, our mission is human health and the environment, but today is the special focus on water. So first of all, Wisconsin Constitution grants citizens rights to the waters of the state. So that's a basis of a lot of laws, and that's a basis of some of the lawsuits that we are involved in. We also depend on the Federal Clean Water Act, and the Federal Clean Water Act covers everything, primarily though, effluent that goes directly into water. So not, point source pollution, what comes from a factory. But also it does cover some agricultural situations such as CAFOs. What it doesn't cover, though, is non-point. So a lot of our efforts have to do with protecting the waters from non-point pollution. What the Clean Water Act allows us to do is to sue the government, to sue companies doing citizen lawsuits. So those sometimes the laws are not being enforced by the government. We've had suits against the DNR where they weren't doing what they needed to do, and one of them went all the way to the state Supreme Court. In that case, we did win. So it allows citizens to sue violators in federal court, and sometimes we take cases to the state court. This was just one example of a case that went to the state Supreme Court where we did sue the DNR. So something that we've been involved in is filing petitions to the federal government. We have 2 petitions that are still current. One is regarding the enforcement of the Clean Water Act, and a second one is the enforcement of the Safe Drinking Water Act. And we have, let's see, Lynn, are you in the Safe Drinking Water Act? Yes. So that was a focus on Kewaunee County. And the other one I mentioned we had, this is really interesting because as you see the pictures, it's kind of covered up by that little blurb there. But some of those folks were former DNR officials who were petitioners to the EPA under the Safe Drinking Water Act to get the DNR to, under the Clean Water Act, to get the DNR to enforce the 75 deficiencies that were involved, that were lacking, I should say. So the Safe Drinking Water Act petition has kind of like taken a long time. You know, it took a long time. What it did is it prompted the EPA to come in and say to the DNR, okay, you need to do something about the drinking water conditions in Kewaunee County because there are many, many contaminated wells. So the DNR said, well, okay, we'll form these advisory groups. So these advisory groups were formed and met for almost a year and came up with a lot of great recommendations. And then, sorry?
Up to like 5 years, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those groups went on, the longest was 5 years, but they spanned several years.
Yes, so anyway, the groups met for a long time. I don't know if it was as long as 5 years, but then the technical advisory committees were formed. Even though that the advisory groups had these great recommendations, the DNR almost like started over from scratch and said, we're going to form technical advisory committees because the way we saw it was they didn't have enough agricultural people on the advisory committees. So Big Ag became part of the technical advisory committees, Hog Producers Association, the Dairy Business Association, and others. So we met for about a year, meetings in Madison, to come up with really modest, in the end, there were very modest changes to what was the administrative code called NR 151. So that is now, really, it only happened in areas where there's karst. So we were looking at changes in the whole state, and it only applied to areas where there's karst topography. That's where there's limestone bedrock that's lying not too deeply under the surface, and it's fractured, and it allows water to pass through the contaminated water to pass into the groundwater. I'm ready to throw this mic away. So, the Safe Drinking Water Act was very important that we had that act, that we could petition then the EPA and get the EPA to come in and force the DNR to do some things. What helps us, though, when we're looking at trying to gather information for a potential lawsuit is open records laws. So we have the Wisconsin Public Records Law that was enacted in 1981, and then the Federal Freedom of Information Act, often referred to as the FOIA, was enacted in 1966. So that allows us to get information from the government. So if the government requires a business, a factory, a CAFO, to turn in information to them about their meeting their requirements, whatever their pollution standard, they have what's called a pollution permit. These factories have pollution permits. So it's a permit to pollute. And then there are certain standards that they have to meet. So we get to know if they're meeting those standards. We get to get that information from the DNR, from any other government agency, and see if, in fact, they are meeting their permit requirements. So the EPA ECHO enforcement and compliance history online is very important to us because we are able to use that database to find whether or not companies are, in fact, keeping the water safe, if they're working within their permit requirements. And we have searched that database and at times found some serious concerns. For a while we were noting that there were quite a few mercury variances being granted, and we're like, whoa, why are these companies getting mercury? The companies are actually municipal sewage treatment plants. They're getting variances to put more mercury in than what their previous permit allowed. So they were asking for a variance at the level of their highest exceedance. Oh, we couldn't meet the requirement, and this is what we ended up with. So now we want a permit that allows us to have that much. So we filed several letters of concern which is the basis then if we were to go back later and try to do a lawsuit. So if we keep seeing that this company is now next time in their next permit cycle asking for a higher variance, then we've got something to build on in a court case. So we also have used ECHO for looking up, and you can use ECHO too. It's just EPA ECHO. Look it up, and you can find, like if you see smoke coming from a factory that doesn't seem right, or if you see water pollution coming from even, say, a parking lot from a commercial area. We did this all along the Fox River from Green Bay through De Pere. We checked water permits to see if there was runoff permits for all these places along the river, and in fact, we were pleased to find out that they all were compliant with their permits. So, in other words, they weren't just letting water run off into the river, and we did that using the ECHO database. So, research. You know, that was one of the things I studied in paralegal school, legal research. So sometimes that does involve some legal writing as well. In this case, the open records law resulted in a judgment against Utica Energy, and going through, there was actually a legal firm that we work with called Midwest Environmental Advocates. One of their law clerks was going through the ECHO database and said, oh, look at this. Utica Energy has almost 1,000 days of violations. And it was violations for really putting water that was overheated into a small creek and then raising the temperature of the creek, making it difficult for aquatic organisms to survive there. So in this case, the judgment that the court awarded was for $110,000. Clean Water, we could have gone a long ways, many years, if that was awarded to Clean Water Action Council, but it was awarded to the county Soil and Water Conservation Office to do various soil and stream bank restorations along the river, the creek. And of course, in these cases, the Clean Water Act allows these lawsuits to occur and to recover legal fees. So when you're thinking about this, if you're thinking about, well, if I could just get some lawyers to a law firm to deal with this, remember that if they win the case, their legal fees are paid as part of the judgment. So that's a very important piece to know. Another one that we had that was settled actually out of court was the Appleton coated, and that was actually not a water situation, but it was air. But you remember, what goes in the water ends up on the land. Or, I'm sorry, what goes in the air ends up in the water. First it ends up often on the land, and then filtrates into the water. So here's another case that was found on ECHO. And again, I'm pointing out how important the ECHO database can be to find where there are violations. So we've also involved with motions to intervene in lawsuits in state court. So one case that we were involved in a number of years ago was the DBA was suing the DNR regarding Hall's Calf Ranch and water runoff from calf hutch areas, production areas, and we were able to get a partial settlement in favor of protecting water in that case. And now this case, WMC versus the DNR, we're being represented by Midwest Environmental Advocates. We tried to be a party to the lawsuit. If you can be a party to a lawsuit, then you have a say in how the lawsuit is settled. If you're not a party, then you can simply file amicus briefs or friends of the court briefs and then advise the court as to what your position is on the case and how they should settle the case. So this is a very important case, very, very important. It's a critical case. It's already been lost at the circuit court level in Waukesha. So it's taken away the DNR's authority to have control over thousands and thousands of chemicals. That they were given that authority under the spills law. dating back to like, I think 1978, possibly earlier. So under the spills law, the DNR had a broad authority to say, okay, that's dangerous, and we have this evidence, and there's this research to show that this should be controlled, that this should be cleaned up, or it should be tested for. The WMC, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, they're saying, no, you have to set a standard for every one of those chemicals before you can make them do anything about it. And to get a standard requires legislation, and it requires then turning that legislation into administrative rules, and then those administrative rules to be approved. With NR 151, as Nancy was saying, it took like 5 years or longer to get those rules through the whole process. Because can you imagine that? The DNR could not keep up with all these new PFAS chemicals that are being developed, adding one more carbon here, one more carbon there, something to the chain, and all of a sudden there's a new PFAS chemical. There's well over 2,000 of them right now that are in production. So, also, it's important sometimes to make comments with potential legal action. Here, the request was for an arsenic variance, and we made a comment on that because down the line, those comments can be used in a court case. So, examples of comments, we have permits. There are permit comments. Lots of people made comments on the Kinnard Farms CAFA permit, and that did have an impact on how that permit was awarded. A lot of people have been making comments on the Back 40 mine and regarding especially their wetlands permit. So there's another water issue there, and that permit was withdrawn, so that's still in the process. People have made comments on high capacity wells and on the bill itself, so it's important to make comments on legislation. Every week we send out a weekly update, and in that weekly update we tell people what they might want to do, what action they might want to take. And a lot of times those actions are comments on bills, things that are in the works that the legislators need to hear from the public. And sometimes they're just putting an X here and an X here, or a tally here, a tally here. How many of my constituents are in favor and how many are not? And it sure helps to be a constituent rather than just somebody who's not in their voting area. The coal tar pavement bill, we really worked on that, and that's a whole other issue, and we'll be talking about how we are working locally on that. So remediation plans, another area that you might want to make comments. So appeals to local governments. Now this is a place where you can really make a difference. You can really make a difference when you are working with local governments, and this is an example of working with local governments and to protect water, both air and water. The United Seven Generations Corporation proposed a gasification incinerator in the Green Bay area, and they made all these claims about it, but really those things weren't true. So we took a threefold action, and we pressured the tribe to abandon the project through petitions and boycotts. We also pressured the alderpersons that it was a threat to human health. But then, having a legal background, my area was to find a legal basis to rescind the CUP or the conditional use permit, and we did find that there was fraud in the application. And we proved to the city council that it was a fraudulent application, and they were duty-bound to rescind the permit, or they were opening the door to many cases of fraud without being able to go back and rescind a permit. So they did rescind the permit. So here's another, manure without an A. So manure storage pit in the town of Little River. Some folks came to us and said, hey, they're going to do this manure pit. What are we going to do about it? So we looked into it and said, oh, well, they were asking for a variance. So a variance opens the door to getting a permit denied. So they got the variance, but they did not meet the county's requirements for a variance. That was our argument. We pointed out the lack of conditions that were met, and in fact, the county did revoke the permit. So again, that's where you can work locally to make change. So there's a news article about that. So passing a local ordinance. This is another area of local action that you can do. And I know that we worked with Lynn and Nancy and others in Kewaunee County and Door County and Brown County to get ordinances passed to ban manure spraying. And primarily it was a human health issue, but it was also a water issue, again, ways to protect the water to stop manure spraying. So we ended up doing lots of presentations, and there's a picture of a portable manure sprayer. So we went around to many towns, and of the 17 towns in those counties, every one that we presented to, except for maybe 2, did not pass a ban. Some of these towns passed bans even though we didn't do a presentation. All of a sudden it was like a domino effect. And they were, oh, the town nearby and around us have passed bans, we better do it too. Now the key is, for this, is when you're working to protect waters with a local ordinance, you have to have a local citizen request an agenda to get on the agenda. You don't want to try and do it as an outside group. Provide examples of ordinances to those town officials. Then, once you get on the agenda, have a qualified presenter give a concise presentation. So if you're not a voter, if you're not a constituent there, as a resident of that town or city or village, then you might want to help somebody who could be the presenter, or you get them to say that they have somebody who would like to present, who the constituent would like to have present. So we did that a lot. We did a lot of presentations that way, and we were brought into the situation, into the board meeting by one of the voters. So we want to educate citizens on the issue, and you're doing that so that they can talk about it too. And if they don't want to talk about it, have them make a sign and hold it up. Just have a sign, no manure spraying, and so forth. So, and you have to have a large turnout of constituents. That's really important. In one town I helped, they had 2 people. Guess what? It was dropped immediately. In my town, that I organized locally, the news headline the next day read, "Town Hall overflows with people against manure spraying." So that's the kind of headline you want the next day. So the town hall was filled. They never saw that many people for a meeting before, and they said, well, I guess we should pass that. So make sure the media is present. It's nice to have a nice report the next day. We've been working, besides banning manure spraying, we've been working on coal tar pavement sealant bans. Now that is both a human health concern as well as a water concern. When that runs off of pavements, it ends up getting in creeks, and it impacts the aquatic organisms that live in those bodies of water. But it also impacts humans, especially children. So it gets tracked into buildings, it gets blown into buildings, and there's a picture of my granddaughter doing a demo. Fortunately, this was not a bad pavement. It was not coated with coal tar pavement sealant. Question, yes?
Does it seep into the well water?
We think that you could probably have some contamination from well water if you had a lot of pavement and if you had a shallow well. But primarily it's ingestion, hand-to-mouth ingestion, but certainly it can contaminate well water. And in fact, it settles though. It settles, so I'm not sure how that would settle in a well. So I can't really accurately answer that question. But if it's in a runoff pond, on a parking area, sometimes they have to then dredge that out and to put that dredged material in a special landfill. So we have more recently got Sturgeon Bay, Jacksonport, Gibraltar, Green Bay, and De Pere to pass bans. So we've been working really actively on that. So hey, we're available. The Valley has not had much effort to get coal tar pavement bans passed. So you have a big deficit here in that regard, because there are sealers. It went to the state. There was a hearing in the Senate committee, and all these coal tar pavement sealing companies came and they said, we'll go out of business if you do this. And so the Senate dropped it. So all along the lakeshore, bans were passed because there was a grant from Wisconsin Make Lake Michigan Fund. It's not quite exact, but there was money to do counties along the lakeshore. So that's where the emphasis was. We were hoping a state ban would happen. In the meantime, it hasn't. And my representative, Joel Kitchen, says it's not likely to happen in the near future. So see us if you want to get a ban passed. And we have a video presentation on our website about it under resources. So another area to consider when taking action is to try to deny a social license. And this was a big action that came, or effort that was used to stop the Back 40 mine. A lot of people wrote letters, and it was very clear that people did not want that. So again, denying a social license was something new to me. I hadn't heard about that until about 2 or 3 years ago. And it was like, yeah, that doesn't make sense, even though that's kind of what we were doing way back with the Seven Generations Corporation, denying them a social license by getting people to boycott their business. And Al Geddix, Dr. Geddix, was the one who introduced that term to us. So just to wrap up here, we do have this this is the biggest threat right now that we see to water, PFAS. And we had a big conference on it yesterday, and that conference presentations will be on our website towards the end of the month and available by email in our weekly update right away this coming week. So if you sign up for the weekly update, that'll be there. The sign-up sheet's on the table. So that really, we have, I'm holding this up because we have this newsletter, which is really all about many of the things that were in the conference. So you might check that out. And then this newsletter using local, state, and federal laws. So what we've been talking about here, that newsletter is also on the table. And why do I have a food waste composting? I guess because we have food waste composters available. And we did one presentation in Appleton a while back, and we still have some available. And of course, it's better to get it composted and turned into something useful than to put it in the landfill where it's going to create methane. So I think that's all I have for you today. Are there any questions? I know I maybe ran a little bit long.
Sir. I was curious because I live in an area where there's a lot of agricultural runoff that's probably causing a lot of health problems. How could I go about collecting data to actually see if there's a correlation between those kinds of things? Because we think the groundwater might be contaminated, but it's just a theory, How can I get my hands on some concrete data to prove whether that's actually the case or not?
Well, first of all, if you live in an area where there is a municipal well, then you can have the municipal well data, and you can ask for that under a FOIA request. Otherwise, well sampling can be expensive, but there are basic tests for nitrates and bacteria, and there's a third one that escapes me at the moment. But that's a really basic test that costs about, maybe $60. The University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point runs a lot of testing programs, so you could check in with them as well.
Friend who went there.
Maybe with the farmers with the manure and the pollutants from the farms, do you ever suggest regenerational farming?
The question is, do we ever suggest regenerational farming? And we have actually, I think, an article on the table called Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and the emphasis was on regenerational farming, giving an example there. So we do Actually, we've had presentations on 2 of them on not rotational grazing, but managed grazing, which is kind of regenerational farming. And I think one more question right here.
Yeah, I'm from Wausau, and all 3 of our city wells were contaminated with PFAS to levels beyond what was recommended by the Department of Health. So as a solution, the city implemented a temporary remediation program using a type of resin to kind of capture PFAS. So subsequently, what we're starting to see is from time to time that resin gets really oversaturated, and then it's kind of like the levels go up. But what strikes me even more and more Wausonians is that the water tax has gone up 60% in just a year. And part of that is due, they say, to all these methods we're going to need to filtrate the water, particularly the PFAS. So what is a good kind of counter argument or perspective to articulate to kind of put in the proper perspective of tax rates going up to clean the water? You know, part of it is, well, why doesn't the city look for the polluters? Who caused this? Why don't they pay for it? Well, that's a complicated long-term process too. So what kind of arguments do you use to kind of put that in perspective?
Okay, the gentleman has a three-part question. The first part is if if the treatment in Wausau is not taking out all the PFAS, I would recommend adding a countertop process that's fairly inexpensive compared to like reverse osmosis and so forth. So it's in our newsletter. It's in that newsletter about PFAS, and it's called Cyclopure, and it takes out a lot of PFAS that might have been missed. So you got that option, and you can also you get a mailer to send it back to the company. So you're like, what am I going to do with this contaminated filter now? You can send it back to the company. Second part was the cost of the water. The water rate is going way up, and I would recommend that you get after your state legislator to get that PFAS bill passed, which is supposed to provide water solution problem or money to solve those kind of things at that local level. So get after them and say, hey, we need this in Wausau to help reduce the costs. And the third thing was having to do with the polluters. Yes, we really need to work hard at stopping the pollution. The problem is in Wausau, it's already there, and some of it's in the soil, and because biosolids were spread that were contaminated. And that's what happened in Stella near Rhinelander, where they have the highest contamination in the entire country from biosolids that were spread containing PFAS. Do I have time for one more question? Who's my moderator? Sure. Yes.
Familiar with a company called A-Clarity? They have an electrochemical process that breaks the bond between fluorine and carbon and decomposes the PFAS.
We did a lot of research for this PFAS newsletter, and I don't believe we came across that company, so I can't speak to that. Okay, well, you've been a great audience and some good questions. Thank you so much for inviting me. Appreciate it.
So come on up. Lynn, Nancy.
Welcome everybody. My name is Lynn Utesh. I live in Kewaunee County. This is my wife Nancy.
Hi.
We raise 100% grass-fed beef on 150 acres and have been doing that for 30 years. So we're also the co-founders of Kewaunee Cares. And I'm going to let Nancy give you the history on Kewaunee Cares.
Sure. Good morning. I do hope you take 15 minutes to watch that video. And the reason I say that is Karen Urbach, who was the producer of that video, did a really, really great job in taking multiple years of our struggle in Kewaunee County and put it in a 15-minute format. So it's kind of a Cliff Note version of a very long story of contamination in our county, which a lot of our contamination is also related to the karst topography where we live. If some of you are acquainted with the idea of the Niagara Escarpment, we have karst features, which is kind of a pocked, porous rock where we live. So we're highly vulnerable to contamination. My husband and I got involved in this struggle. We moved to Kewaunee County in 2004. And the reason we got so intimately involved was upon purchasing our home, a family was poisoned in Kewaunee County. The entire family was poisoned, and the 8-month-old daughter was in intensive care. And that poisoning was due to liquid manure applied in the winter that seeped into the family's well. And what was most concerning for myself, at that time we had 2 sons in diapers. The year was 2004. And the outpouring of support in our community was for the violating farm. And for me, that was totally not all right, and very concerning, being that we were new in the community, and I was trying to put some barometer out there for what we were experiencing, because it was so wrong to me on so many levels. That the farm got tremendous support. It was, we live in a farming community, this is agriculture, and this is the way it is. And quite frankly, through the years, we have heard a similar tone of, and if you don't like it, you're welcome to move. And that just wasn't okay with us. So it was kind of the beginning of us getting involved in the water issues, but also the idea that we are farmers ourselves. And we were very concerned with what we were seeing in Kewaunee County. And in that point in time, in 2004, there was only 2 CAFOs, which is confined animal feeding operations. Out of all the work that we've done in the last 20 years, I think the hardest learning curve that has taken place was really making people understand what is a CAFO, and really, what does it mean for your community? This is industrial grade agribusiness, and it is in our rural backyards. And it has come to our rural backyards in a way that we probably one of our biggest dairy CAFOs, I would say, in the late, maybe even the mid-90s. You know, 100 cow dairy was a lot of cows to have. And those were the mom and pop operations. And then these agribusiness operations just kind of morphed under that same shield of, this is a family farm. And now, you know, it's a family farm saying that they've got 10,000, 12,000 cows, and they're still in our rural communities. So the kind of growth we've seen in Kewaunee County, like I said, when we came in 2004, there was 2 CAFOs. We now currently have 18 CAFOs. So the region where we're at in Kewaunee County has been referred to as CAFO Alley. We actually, in this region of the state, in northeast Wisconsin, we have the most industrial dairies per acre in the nation, which is astounding. Just real quick on Kewaunee Cares, in 2011, after meeting for many years with concerned neighbors for coffee, we founded an organization, Kewaunee Cares, which is Citizens Advocating Responsible Environmental Stewardship. We deal with CAFO issues, water issues, but we also address air quality issues and whatnot where we live. And I think we've had a lot of successes, but I think, like Dean said, with his organization, you know, education and awareness are the key things that we try to bring to the citizens where we live. And I'm just going to let Lynn add to anything there. And also, like I said, please do take the time to watch that 15-minute video because it's really, really good. And several documentaries and videos that have been done. Another really good one is Searching for Sustainability. If you have not seen that, it's a PBS, and it's about Kewaunee County and about our struggles there. So you can get that right on Google. So Searching for Sustainability, another really great movie about our issues, and then also Right to Harm, which is amazing. Did you have a question, Christy?
Before you
Okay.
can you say something about the Clean Water Act and the fact that industrial farming is currently exempt from the Clean Water Act, and what can we do to change that?
So the question was, currently the big CAFOs are exempted from the Clean Water Act. And one of the biggest issues with that is that, so Clean Water Act, kind of like Dean had said earlier, is about a point source. That means like a pipe going into a waterway. So CAFOs, their major pollution isn't the facility itself, it's the spreading fields. So just to give you some background as it going, Kewaunee County, all three of our rivers are on the EPA's impaired waters list. That's over 30% of our wells tested are contaminated with E. coli and or nitrates. Even this year with a drought, I don't know if anybody noticed, we had a drought this year. We had 27% of the wells tested this year were contaminated with E. coli or nitrates. So even with no water flowing basically to push that manure into our groundwater, we still had 27% of those wells were contaminated. That's and the reason that we have all that contamination is because in Kewaunee County, you know, like Nancy said, we have 18 CAFOs. Our largest CAFO has a manure pit that is 82 million gallons of liquid manure.
In a karst.
In a karst. And from the bottom of that pit to groundwater is 5 feet. And now by state regulation, a manure pit can leak 500 gallons per acre per day. So that means that for every acre of a manure pit, it can be leaking 500 gallons per day into our drinking water.
And tell how many acres, like 15 acres.
That's, like Nancy said, so that pit covers approximately 15 acres. So the biggest problem is, one, nothing regulates that portion that goes out underneath because they don't test for it. But that 82 million gallons, it goes out onto the farm fields. Those farm fields is where the pollution occurs. In Kewaunee County, I have seen nutrient management plans that have the ability to spread 32,000 gallons per acre. Think about that, 32,000 gallons per acre. Your city lots that are like a quarter acre, how would you like to have 8,000 gallons of sewage dumped on your lot? That's what we're dealing with. If you had that on your city lot, do you think you might end up with polluted water? Do you think you might have a little bit of runoff? That's what's occurring, and it is under regulation. It's okay. The Clean Water Act is only designed to protect a pipe dumping into a waterway. We need the legislation changed, the Clean Water Act changed, so that that can become a point source. Unfortunately, there's huge amounts of industry that will fight against that. We're actually seeing now that there's a real push for big oil to tie up with big ag. Not that there wasn't already that connection. And that's with the methane digesters. We have methane digesters in Kewaunee County. We have, the last I checked, it was 7 digesters. They are touted as fixing environmental issues. Our biggest farms have digesters. Why don't we have the most pristine water in the state? Oh, there are other thing that they talk about is nutrient management plans. Over 90% of the farmland in Kewaunee County is covered by nutrient management plans. If nutrient management plans, which regulates that 32,000 gallons per acre, if that was to protect our water and our people, we should have the most pristine waters in the state of Wisconsin as well. Yet we have some of the worst. So that's, yes, question in the back there.
When oil companies go fracking, they blast water under the ground to force the oil toward a point where it can be collected, right? So we can expect that oil gets into, many parts of that underground. Would you compare what's happening with nutrient management plans to fracking?
So fracking blasts cracks into the rock. Karst is, we already have it. Okay? Karst, the big thing with karst topography is the limestone is cracked all the way through it. So that's another, one of the big things that DNR, EPA, everybody says is, if you got contaminated water, put it in a new well. That doesn't work. Because, especially in karst, if there's all those cracks, we've actually had DNR, the wells have been replaced. They might be good for a short time. It's just a matter of time before that manure gets down through those cracks again to a deeper level. It's still there. All those cracks, they don't stop at a certain point and keep you protected. Those cracks keep going down through. So basically, in fracking, they bust it open. In our community, it's already busted open, and you can't fix it. And the other tie between, I started to say big oil and big ag is for these methane digesters. So there's a lot of people out there that think methane digesters eliminate, or manure digesters eliminate manure. Digesters do not eliminate manure. What goes into a digester comes out of a digester. The only thing a digester does is produces more methane that then is vented off and utilized to burn. Guess what? You burn methane, you still get carbon dioxide. You're still polluting the environment. But you also, at the same time, you still have that manure. It's in different forms. Now it's like a solid and a liquid. But guess what? It still goes into a manure pit, and it still gets land applied. They'll say that it actually eliminates pathogens. It might reduce pathogens coming out of the digester, but then you put all of that into a manure pit, and all those pathogens regrow, and it ends up back on the fields. That's how we end up with contaminated water. Nitrates. It also, the thing that it does is when you put manure through a digester, it actually increases the amount of ammonia in what's being discharged out of there by up to 80% more. Ammonia, when you apply it to the land, turns into nitrogen, which turns into nitrates in our water. One of those pollutants that is causing issues in Kewaunee County. And it's not just Kewaunee County, it's actually all over the state. Those nitrates are a major issue. It's actually one of the biggest pollutants for groundwater all across the state of Wisconsin, and pretty much nationally as well. Again, talking about the pathogen removal, Dr. Mark Borkart did a lot of research on these digesters. He worked with the USDA Egg Research Center out of Marshfield. He stated in his research that you can have even a 99.9% reduction in pathogens coming out of that digester. But the biggest problem is there are so many pathogens going into it in that manure that even at that rate of reduction, it still doesn't bring it down to a safe level. That's how toxic this can be. So that's one of the biggest issues that we have. Any questions, by the way? Go ahead.
First question is Kewaunee County have the most CAFOs of any county in Wisconsin, state of Wisconsin?
No. I believe at this point in time,
Go 1, 2, 3, which give me the counties?
I believe Brown County is number one.
I think Brown, and so I think the regions that are really heavily inundated with CAFOs is Brown County. I think you have at least 23 in the Green Bay area. Calumet County, Manitowoc County, Kewaunee County, and then on the peninsula, I think there's now 2 or 3 in the Door County area. There was just a permit hearing yesterday for a farm that wants to expand to CAFO size in Door County, which of course is not good news for Door County residents or their beaches or their water. So, but this region of the state, the counties I just told you, really makes us the highest density of these CAFOs in the nation. And not long ago somebody said, why do you think that is? Why do you think this is the place where CAFOs want to set up shop?
That's my second question.
Okay. And you know what? Somebody said lack of regulation. That's a problem. But the thing that probably most of us in this room here want to protect most, water. And you know what? Imagine all of that water that is, I'm supposed to stand here, that is free, right? And you've got this long straw, right? Because you have a high capacity well. In fact, you probably have 4 or 5 high capacity wells. And you don't pay for that water. So you know what? You don't mind spraying down shit in your barn or anything because it's free. So that long straw into that Great Lakes water that all of us love so much and want to protect, think about it. This industry is using that water for free. And when you hear the industry, one thing they like to say is, now come on now, my family wants clean water. My cattle needs clean water. But I'll tell you what, that water coming out of a high capacity well is a lot different than what you're drawing from your tap. So when somebody says that to you, you've got to understand these high capacity wells and the kind of water that can be drawn out of that, is incredible. So setting up a business here and knowing that you have an endless water supply for an industry that uses a lot of water. In fact, when we talk about these biodigesters, how much water are we talking about is being used?
Thousands of gallons per day just for those to operate.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a lot of water that these operations use. So one thing I did want to talk about that's been of interest to me is something that comes into our community to help these digesters, and that's industrial waste. It's also, if you read in record anywhere, it won't be called industrial waste, it'll be called a substrate. But these additives come to our community and are currently they're brought in to help the digesters to work better and assimilate all of that mixed brew that is being digested in this machinery. But it comes into our communities by the tons. And why that's problematic is that after it goes into a digester, it is land applied, which means it is on your land, and then it's quite possibly going to meet up with your water resources. So a big concern for, I think, everyone is these PFAS chemicals, and it's like, when you get a mixed bag of substrates or industrial wastes or whatever you'd like to call them, come to your community, I just see that as a huge health threat. And I don't think most people really understand when you talk about things like a biodigester. And everyone who doesn't know that much about it says, well, this is going to be the cure-all for all of that pollution that's happening in Kewaunee County because they're getting these big digesters in. And the interesting thing about all this technology is, when will we have the discussion that we have too many animals in concentration in a small area that cannot, our land base cannot tolerate anymore. So when you bring in here's the problem. For anyone thinking those digesters are going to help us out, those digesters are going to bring more expansions to my county. Already, there's 2 huge projects in the works in Kewaunee County. And we have county board members that are in meetings and they're saying, this is going to stop millions upon millions of gallons of manure from being spread on our fields. And it's that kind of misinformation and propaganda that really causes problems for our community, because that's not true. What these projects are going to do, and unfortunately they're funded by the taxpayer and our government through subsidies, is the Biden administration and USDA and several other places are giving millions upon millions of dollars to agribusiness interests where we live, and they're these bloated operations that are a serious threat to not only our health and safety, but just our way of life and our quality of life, right? And it's something that all Wisconsinites should be very concerned about. And water issues really started to kind of come in the spotlight these last 20 years. But we are really in a water emergency. So, this isn't an optional drink for all of us to have. It's necessary for our lives. And I think we need everybody in Wisconsin to stand up for protecting our waters. You have a question?
The question was that we should eat more, that we should subsidize vegetables and fruit production versus meat, and I'll put dairy in with that as well. And I agree completely. That's right now our food system subsidizes corn and soybeans. That's not even human food. The majority of that goes to cattle, pigs, and chickens. You had actually asked when Dean was up here about regenerative agriculture. And one of the things I watched the Ken Burns special on the bison, American bison, the buffalo. There was tens of million buffalo in the United States prior to European settlement. We have fewer cows than we did buffalo, yet we have more polluted water and more polluted waterways. Regenerative ag, like you talked about, animals belong on grass. Cows belong on grass. That's what their natural diet is. They need to be let out of the barns. We need to start to treat our land and our water the way nature intended it to be, and that is to allow it to grow and to thrive with the proper biology that we keep killing with commercial fertilizers, pesticides, insecticides, herbicides. We are killing our land, and because we're killing our land, we end up with greater and greater water contamination, because the land, the soil, is the filter for our water. And any time that you put manure in confinement into a manure pit, it becomes anaerobic. You go through a digester, it's anaerobic. You actually end up killing that soil, because the top 6 inches where the roots are, they need to be aerobic. They need to be alive, and the biology needs to be thriving. We have the potential to feed even more people than we are today if we allow nature to work, and if we quit subsidizing the corn and soybeans and actually subsidize food. Your point is exactly right. We need to quit subsidizing industrial agriculture, we need to start subsidizing the people, because that's really what it would be. We need to subsidize the people with food and vegetables.
It's my pleasure to introduce some very hardworking folks from nature to hear some really wonderful news, which I'm sure you're going to hear about if you haven't already read about it in the newspapers. But to be able to have these guys here today, it represents a coalition of wisdom, rights of nature, and an indigenous organization. But to see that coalition come together to learn about it, that was really exciting because, you know, our history as settlers has been to ignore the understanding that we need to live with nature, have respect for nature, not extract from nature. The whole concept of dominion did not exist on Turtle Island until we came. So to see wisdom stepping in and working, to see this coalition get formed was really exciting to me.
Well, thank you for that good introduction. There have been a lot of great points made already. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Terry Dawson. I'm a member of this congregation, which Ron has already told you all about, but we are proud to be supporters of Esther, which is the local affiliate of Wisdom. And we'll hear more about Wisdom in a little bit, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, to have us come together here, because we do spend too much time in our silos. We're doing the same work. We need to find ways of working together, collaborating, and sharing our information. So what is Rights of Nature? Rights of Nature is a movement which seeks to gain legal recognition for the rights of the natural world to exist, thrive, and evolve, to be defended against threats and harm, to receive an appropriate remedy when it's found that those rights have been violated. This might seem almost obvious, and it clearly feels essential if we're going to be healthy and exist on this planet, deal effectively with the climate crisis, but it's not obvious from a legal point of view. And we've talked about the many legal battles that are being fought. Sometimes they're uphill, sometimes we find gains, but we have to keep going in many different respects. Rights of Nature can give us another tool. There's many laws and regulations, as has been said, that govern what's usually called natural resources. But the perspective of these laws is generally to specify how these resources can be exploited rather than how they should be protected. We need to be viewing nature as something we're part of, something that's part of us, rather than something we have a right to use. Water is life for us and for all beings. But if the water has no right to flow, to be clean, to renew itself, to be restored, then how can any of us be safe? Rights of nature laws secure legal rights of the natural environment, including species and ecosystems. Legal rights include rights to exist, flourish, regenerate, evolve, and be restored. The Rights of Nature movement reflects a growing understanding that nature deserves our respect, protection, and legal rights. It requires a fundamental shift in humankind's relationship with nature from one of use and exploitation to one of care and protection. Since 2006, local communities, states, and countries, as well as tribal nations and First Nations, have established laws, adopted policies, and issued court decisions to recognize and protect the legal rights of nature. These laws, policies, and court decisions, for the first time, recognize nature as possessing its own inherent legal rights. They give us a mechanism for people and governments to enforce and defend those rights on behalf of nature. For example, in 2006, Tamaqua Borough, Pennsylvania, banned the dumping of toxic sludge as a violation of the rights of nature. This was the very first place in the world to create this legal recognition. And since 2006, dozens of communities in 10 states around the U.S. have enacted rights of nature laws. Many of Wisconsin's tribal nations, including the Oneida and Menominee, have adopted rights of nature provisions. Sensible to the threat posed by the Back 40 mine, the Menominee have endorsed the rights of the Menominee River. The Oneida Nation resolved that its leaders, people, and government will create and adopt legislative and judicial protection to the rights of nature, utilizing good policies, science, and culture. And we're seeking to find ways of doing more of that, doing it more effectively. And to that end, we've been organizing around the state, and I'm happy to introduce David Liners, who is the Executive Director of Wisdom in Wisconsin.
So the first thing I want to do is just to actually encourage you, please, before you go, be sure you take one of these brochures, because then you can look up our website and you can kind of see more about some of this stuff. So the network, the Wisdom Network, is, as Terry mentioned, we have, for example, Esther here in the Fox Cities. We have about a dozen such organizations around the state. We've up in Green Bay, we have a group called Joshua, and Micah is in Milwaukee, and Moses in Madison. We have all of these things around. And they're predominantly, though not entirely, faith-based groups, okay? It's members of congregations of a lot of different denominations, a lot of different religions from across the spectrum. Actually, the Reverend Richard Shaw, who's the president of the Micah group in Milwaukee yesterday, kind of made a good point at a press conference saying that, you know, we really feel like we need to do this because in a certain way, like so many things in this country and in this world, organized religion kind of messed things up. You know, I mean, bad messages, bad religion. They kind of took a concept of stewardship and turned it into a concept of ownership. You know, that it's kind of like misuse of religion, excuses a lot of bad stuff. So we feel like we have an obligation to say, no, we need to kind of step up and say, no, as people of faith, we actually believe that we are part of the world. We don't believe we're owners of the earth. We believe that we're part of the world with everything else that God created. And that we have a role to play in this, but it's not like it's ours to mess up. Like it's our job to help protect. So as Wisdom, we've taken this on, and we've, under the leadership of the Menakanakan, which is an organization on the Menominee Reservation that actually has been sort of leading us in this and doing a lot of the education in this. And then our organizations around. So what's our goal? Our eventual goal, which I don't know that many of us here will be here to see, but maybe, who knows, with redistricting things could happen faster. But our eventual goal would be actually to see the Constitution of the state of Wisconsin recognize the rights of nature in Wisconsin. That's a little ways away, maybe, but who knows, Stranger things have happened. But in the meantime, we're trying to find ways to take incremental steps to build awareness. So yesterday, which you were mentioning, in Milwaukee County, our county executives signed a resolution of Milwaukee County recognizing the principles of the rights of nature. Okay, so it's not a legally binding thing. This is baby step number one, but it's at least getting them on the record, saying we get it. We understand what this is, and we are in support of it. The next thing we're going to do is to come back to actually try to see if we can get it put into law. There's other steps folks can take all over. Like any township can actually pass a law recognizing the rights of a waterway, a species, something within their jurisdiction. Sometimes kind of the smaller the better. The people in Pennsylvania, that was a little town that actually declared the rights of whatever it was, the particular thing. The idea is that when that happens, the river or the species out in Washington State, there was actually a lawsuit because there was a rights of nature law on tribal land. There was actually a lawsuit that was literally the salmon versus the city of Seattle. Because the salmon were recognized as having rights to exist. And as you heard earlier, that actually came to a good end. It didn't wind up in court. Too bad, kind of, because it didn't get tested. But in fact, it got settled out of court. But in fact, the salmon were recognized as having standing. Much as we would hope the Menominee River will be recognized as actually having standing. That someone can stand in for the Menominee River and say, wait a minute, we need to protect these rights. It's a real shift. You know, as Dean was saying before, most of our environmental law is actually about how much we can pollute. The rights of nature is starting from the vantage point of the natural world. And the rights that the actual world has, that the water, that the land, that the animal species have. So that's what we're trying to do. It's really a kind of changing the script. It's changing who we are in the world, what our relationship is to the world, and it's changing where rights need to lie. So there's a million ways to be involved in it. Again, any county can do what we did in Milwaukee. You know what happened in Milwaukee? About 6 of us each called our own county supervisor and found out that 4 of them were receptive to actually having a meeting with us and learning about this. And one of them said, I'll introduce it. And we got some people to kind of, lobby for it and kind of moved it forward. Again, it's a relatively low stakes thing, but we got a lot of publicity to it. It's got people talking about rights of nature. You can do that in any county. We can do it in any town, any jurisdiction, to actually recognize the rights. It can be of everything, or it can be the rights of something very specific, like the salmon, or there's the White Earth Band in Minnesota has a lawsuit on behalf of the wild rice, that they've recognized the rights of the wild rice, and the wild rice is actually in court with the state of Minnesota.
Before she died, my friend Nettie McGee helped Outagamie County grant a resolution to promise or to promote clean water for everybody in the county. And as far as I know, it's still standing.
Okay. Good. Yes. So these kind of things are possible. We're taking it a step at a time. We also, if you go to the website, you can find, and I think there may be even a QR code or something someplace, but there's a petition. We're actually building a list of people who actually believe in the rights of nature. One of the things, if you go online and you put your name on the petition, you'll also get on our newsletter, so that you can see what's happening and you can hear about things. The goal is really to first educate, kind of create this paradigm shift in people's minds. It's a little hard to wrap your head around at first, because we're not used to thinking in terms, weirdly, it's easier for people to imagine corporations having rights than it is to imagine a river having rights. But but it's hard to wrap your mind around rights belonging to the natural world. But once people get it, they actually start to get excited about it. And actually, from a faith perspective, people get excited about it. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. That actually fits with what I really believe in, and that sort of thing. One more question, then I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Richards.
I wasn't really raising my hand.
Oh, okay.
I was kind of halfway stretching, but I just did want to comment that going to UW Green Bay, I had a lot of exposure to the Menominee community that was there, and it's very much, as you're saying, there is a faith component to treating the whole world like a circle rather than a pyramid, and it's starting to change things around, but I just hope we can take it far enough, fast enough to actually do something about it.
Absolutely, because really, Native American spirituality has been this forever. This is not news to Native American folks. This is not hard for them to get, because this is us catching up, hopefully, to their understanding of where we fit in the world and what our relationship is with the natural world. And I just want to ask Reverend Richards to come up and talk to us just a little bit as a religious leader about how this ties in with Unitarian principles, the UU principles, etc.
Thank you, Dick. Okay. So, I am a Unitarian Universalist minister. I serve Door County as a hospice chaplain, and it's been my pleasure and privilege to visit this place every so often. Unitarian Universalists, when people ask me what we believe in, I tell them that we have no creed, that we gather by covenant. And if you want to know what that covenant is, you go out in the lobby and look along the edge of the ceiling, and it's all written up there. We call them our 7 principles. The first one refers to the worth and dignity of every person. The last one refers to the interdependent web of life. Those two it's appropriate that they border our principles, that they begin and end our principles, because each and every person has value. Each and every person requires dignity. And when we talk about the rights of nature, we're giving nature personhood. If a corporation, as David said, if a corporation can be a person, so can a stream. A stream lives. A forest lives. A herd of deer lives. Someone was saying one day that they were talking about this in a county meeting one time, and one of the members of the county said, "Yeah, well, does that mean I can't go out and shoot a deer?" And the answer was, "No, what that means is you can't go out and shoot all of them." So that's the nature, that's kind of a theological basis of this work from a Unitarian Universalist point of view. I think if you go into the Bible or go into whatever scripture you read and you study and you learn from, you can find some similar concepts. This is fundamental. And we need to start changing the mindset of our society. And that only happens in places like churches. But maybe not. Because you have to get someone to come to a church. It happens if you take your beliefs out onto the street and talk to people about them. Let people know what you feel. Let people know that nature is not something that we own. It's not there to serve us. Nature is something that we're part of. And it's something that we belong to. That interdependent web. And for all of you who came here talking about water today, water is the blood of life. And without it, nothing will live. So we have to go there. We have to protect that. And I believe that once we start to shift that thinking of every person having the dignity to live, and all of us being interdependent, then issues like poverty can begin to be addressed. Then issues like war can begin to be addressed. We have to make that shift in people's thinking. And I hope we can do that sooner rather than later.